There's something they don't tell you about the most successful people in the room. Not in the books, not in the interviews, not in the highlight reels. And it's this: the drive that makes them unstoppable often comes from a wound they've never healed. You see the polished suit, the impressive title, the ruthless discipline. But what you don't see, what they've learned to hide better than anyone, is the secret weakness they carry behind all that strength. It's not laziness. It's not lack of clarity. It's overcompensation. A deep, quiet voice inside that whispers, "You're not enough. Keep going. They still don't respect you." That voice becomes the engine, the fuel, the invisible whip behind their ambition. But here's the twist. The very thing that got them to the top is the same thing that can quietly destroy them from within. Let's pull the curtain back. Have you ever noticed how some of the most accomplished people are also the most insecure? They don't show it, not in public, but it leaks out in subtle ways. The overreactions, the constant need for validation, the fear of slowing down. They don't chase success for freedom. They chase it to outrun a ghost. And ghosts don't stay buried forever. The world sees the achievement. The inner world feels like a fraud. This is where the real psychology kicks in. Most high achievers aren't striving towards something. They're escaping from something. A childhood where nothing was ever good enough. A moment of shame that carved a permanent script into their mind. A need to prove, again and again, that they belong. It's not ambition. It's armor. And the more armor they wear, the more disconnected they become. From themselves, from others, from peace. Because what happens when your entire identity is built on being more? You lose the ability to rest without guilt. You can't relax without feeling like you're falling behind. Stillness feels like weakness. Silence feels like failure. Even joy feels suspicious, like a luxury you haven't earned yet. But here's the most dangerous part. They don't even know they're suffering, because the world keeps applauding. You're crushing it. You're killing the game. You're an inspiration. So they keep performing, keep achieving, keep stacking wins like sandbags against an invisible flood. But no one ever asks, what are you trying so hard to protect? And that is where the unraveling begins. Because when the applause fades, when the high of the next win wears off, all they're left with is themselves. And they don't know who that is anymore. Let's go deeper. There's a moment, usually in private, when it all cracks. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but in silence. The high achiever, sitting in a car after the meeting, staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., opening the fridge for no reason, then closing it again. And in that moment, they feel it. Not burnout. Emptiness. They've done everything right, hit the goals, exceeded expectations, built the empire. And yet, it still doesn't feel like enough. Because here's what no one warns you about. When your success is driven by pain, achievement doesn't heal it. It just distracts you from it. Temporarily. This is the cycle most high performers don't recognize until it's too late. They confuse motion with meaning. They think more results equal more self-worth. But what they're really doing is trying to outrun shame with productivity. And shame is faster than you think. Let's talk about ego, because this is where the architecture of the mask begins. The ego of a high achiever isn't arrogance. It's survival. It's a carefully constructed fortress built to keep doubt out. But it comes at a cost. The same walls that protect them from criticism also isolate them from intimacy. Vulnerability starts to feel like a liability. Admitting uncertainty becomes impossible. And without knowing it, they start performing not just for the world, but for themselves. They curate an identity, I'm the reliable one. I'm the strong one. I'm the winner. And every time life challenges that image, the ego panics. Because it's not just about failing a task, it's about violating the role they've built their entire self around. That's why they overwork. That's why they can't ask for help. That's why they feel more anxious after a compliment than a critique. The mask has to stay on, even when it's suffocating them. And here's the dark irony. The higher they rise, the more praise they get for the very behavior that's destroying them. People admire their grind, their commitment, their no excuses mindset. But no one sees the nervous system in overdrive, the sleep disorders, the inability to sit still, the constant low-level panic of wondering, what if I stop and everything collapses? Because in their mind there is no middle ground. You're either rising or rotting, winning or disappearing. Everything is war. They don't know how to exist in peace because they never had a model for it. So they trade depth for control, presence for progress, joy for productivity. And worst of all, they convince themselves that this is what strength looks like. But what if it isn't? What if the thing they've been avoiding, slowness, softness, stillness, isn't weakness at all? What if it's the only thing that can actually save them? We're about to find out. There comes a point in every high achiever's journey when the tactics that once made them powerful stop working. The late nights, the constant pushing, the obsession with next. It begins to backfire. Their mind gets foggy. Their decision-making slips. Their relationships grow tense. The very drive that built their success starts to erode their humanity. This is where most people double down. They think the answer is more discipline, more sacrifice, more control. But they don't realize they're not fighting laziness. They're fighting depletion. And here's the paradox. High achievers aren't burned out because they're weak. They're burned out because they're constantly overriding their own nervous system. They've trained themselves to ignore every internal signal, hunger, fatigue, emotion, intuition, because those signals threaten the mission. So they don't rest. They collapse. They don't process emotion. They numb it. They don't ask for help. They suffer in silence. All in the name of being high-functioning. But high-functioning is just the elegant word we use for people who are falling apart quietly. And the deeper truth? They're terrified of stopping. Because stopping means feeling. And feeling means confronting a question that ambition was never designed to answer. Who am I if I'm not achieving? This is the existential cliff most high achievers avoid at all costs. Because if their entire identity is built on output, then stillness feels like death. But the human psyche wasn't built to live on performance alone. At some point, the achiever has to decide, do I want to be impressive, or do I want to be whole? That decision rarely happens in daylight. It happens in breakdowns disguised as breakthroughs, in the meeting where nothing lands, in the vacation that still feels like work, in the moment they realize they can't remember the last time they felt proud without an audience. These are the cracks that let the truth leak in. And the truth is this: you can't outperform your wounds forever. Eventually, the subconscious catches up. The armor rusts, the mask slips, and what's underneath isn't failure. It's exhaustion, grief, fear, and something even more haunting: loneliness. Because high achievers often don't just fear failure. They fear being seen without their accomplishments. And that's the real trap. Because if people only love your performance, you never trust that they love you. So you keep performing until something inside says, enough. And if you listen to that voice, really listen, it doesn't tell you to stop striving. It tells you to start healing. And that changes everything. Healing isn't the opposite of ambition, and it's the foundation of sustainable power. But here's where the real challenge begins. For high achievers, healing feels inefficient. There's no measurable outcome, no trophy, no applause, no LinkedIn post that says, "I spent 2 hours today processing my unresolved shame from childhood." It doesn't scale, it doesn't brand well, it doesn't give that dopamine hit of crossing something off a list. And yet, without it, everything they've built will quietly begin to collapse from within. Because no amount of achievement can outrun a nervous system that's been taught to see rest as laziness and love as a transaction. Let's talk ego defense mechanisms, because this is how the smartest people unknowingly sabotage themselves. When ambition is fueled by avoidance, the mind develops clever tricks to stay productive while never getting close to the core wound. Deflection. They redirect hard questions with busyness. Rationalization. They intellectualize emotion instead of feeling it. Projection. They accuse others of being too emotional while secretly terrified of their own. And perfectionism. That's not a standard. That's a shield. A way to stay in control when your inner world feels chaotic. Every system they've built around them, routine, structure, goals, isn't bad. But when it becomes a fortress instead of a tool, it traps them. And here's the twisted part. The more successful they become, the less safe it feels to change. Because now there's something to lose. Reputation, identity, momentum. So they stay stuck in a success story that no longer fits. Wearing a version of themselves that the world claps for, but their soul quietly resents. And the longer they wait, the harder it becomes to admit, "I don't want this version of my life anymore." Because if they say that out loud, everything they've built might start to unravel. But what they don't see, yet, is that this unraveling isn't destruction, it's reinvention. Because when you stop chasing approval and start reclaiming authenticity, something remarkable happens. The ambition doesn't die, it sharpens. But now it's not driven by fear, it's fueled by clarity. Now you're not hustling for validation, you're moving from alignment. Now you don't need to dominate the room. Your presence speaks for itself. And here's the quiet superpower no one talks about. A high achiever who heals becomes untouchable, not because they're perfect, but because they're no longer performing. They've integrated the part of themselves they used to run from, and in doing so they become the rarest kind of powerful, centered, grounded, whole. And that is when the second act begins. There's a moment, a quiet, sacred moment, when the high achiever finally stops running. Not because they gave up, but because they finally realized they don't need to prove anything anymore. This isn't a surrender, it's a return to self, to sanity, to a life that's not built entirely on output, optics, or the fear of falling behind. They realize that being driven isn't the same as being whole, that being respected isn't the same as being connected, that success, true success, isn't about how many people clap when you speak. It's about how deeply you can sit in silence and still feel worthy. And what's wild? That's when everything they were chasing starts to come easier, because power without peace is exhausting. But power with peace, that's magnetic. People can feel it when you're no longer chasing, when you don't need the room to validate you, when you're not performing every second of your life. You become unpredictable in the best way, no longer reactive, no longer playing the ego games. You just exist differently. And from that space, you build differently. You build businesses that actually align with your values. You build relationships where you don't have to pretend. You build boundaries, not to keep people out, but to protect your energy. You start saying no to things you used to chase, and yes to things that used to scare you. Stillness, vulnerability, depth. You stop needing to be the most impressive person in the room, and you start looking for rooms where you can be the most honest version of yourself. This is the part they don't show. The reinvention, the shedding of titles, of performance, of the endless grind to finally meet yourself. Because when the high achiever turns inward, not to collapse but to integrate, they don't lose their edge. They sharpen it. Now their confidence doesn't come from the metrics. It comes from self-trust. Now their clarity isn't about goals. It's about values. Now their leadership isn't about dominance. It's about resonance. And that's when the story shifts. Not from success to failure, but from proving to becoming. Because here's the truth most people never figure out. You don't have to stop achieving. You just have to stop believing that achievement is the only way to matter. Once you get that, everything changes. Not just what you do, but who you are while doing it. And that, right there, is the secret weakness of high achievers. It's also their greatest awakening. But here's something most achievers never realize until they hit the wall. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you outwork it. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of ourselves we repress, deny, or exile. It holds our shame, our fear, our unmet needs. And for high achievers, that shadow often takes the form of deep, unspoken beliefs. I'm only lovable if I succeed. If I stop moving, I disappear. If I don't win, I don't matter. They don't say these things out loud. They may not even be conscious of them. But the shadow doesn't care about awareness. It lives in behavior, in the way they overdeliver, in the way they overpromise, in the way they can't stand the idea of being seen as average. And because they won't face the shadow, they overcompensate for it. Achievement becomes a coping mechanism. But here's the paradox that wrecks them from the inside out. The more they run from their shadow, the more power it has over them. And the longer they ignore it, the more exhausted they become pretending it's not there. Until one day something triggers it. Failure, betrayal, aging, a personal loss, and suddenly their entire identity starts to shake. Because when the high achiever has no access to their shadow, they have no access to their wholeness. They've spent their entire life building a self that was acceptable, but never one that was authentic. And the body always knows. It aches, it tenses, it resists joy. It burns out not because it's fragile, but because it's been screaming for integration. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be complete. That includes your shadow. That includes your softness. That includes the parts you've been hiding under your resume and your goals, and your curated, high-performing self. Because when you finally stop pretending those parts don't exist, you don't lose your power. You reclaim it. Real confidence isn't built from your highlight reel. It's built from knowing the worst parts of yourself and refusing to abandon them. That's the edge no trophy can give you. That's the depth no promotion can fake. That's the kind of presence that doesn't just command a room. It calms it. Because healed achievers don't walk in trying to prove something. They walk in knowing who they are, with or without the performance. And that makes people stop and listen. Not out of obligation, out of reverence, because they can feel the difference. Anyone can be impressive. Few dare to be whole. So here's the quiet revolution for every high achiever listening. It's not about stopping the climb. It's about changing what you're climbing for. Not status, not control, not applause, but peace, fulfillment, truth. You don't need to shrink your ambition. You just need to stop using it to avoid yourself. Because the most powerful version of you isn't the one who always wins. It's the one who doesn't need to.